I am TMH, and
we are TMH.
What does Tigrai Media House mean to you?
Tigrai Media House is more than just an ordinary news outlet.
Tigrai Media House is a platform that gives a voice to minority group.
A place where we get news about our people, by our people, in our own language.
But this platform is not exclusive to Tigray or Tigrayans.
They have worked with international media outlets such as CNN, BBC, the Associated Press, The Telegraph, and Sky News.
To make sure all our stories are heard and the struggle of our people are being amplified across the entire world.
It has been successfully vital the last year as our people have suffered a genocide and telecommunications blackout that hindered journalists from being able to report the atrocities taking place in Tigray.
Tigrai Media House has been a lifeline for us. It is one of the only news sources covering the genocide and war crimes being inflicted on Tigray and all across Ethiopia.
We will forever be grateful to them for being the voice of our people and giving hope to all of our families who have been silenced by this conflict.
And in honor of the 3rd year anniversary since the launch of TMH,
we would like to invite you all to join us in Washington, D.C.
for a 3-day commemorative weekend starting January 14th through January 16th.
The event will include global protests,
Panel discussions,
concert,
a dinner gala,
all in hopes of generating more awareness for the ongoing state-sponsored genocide.
Can't wait to see you all day a day.
I am TMH.
I am TMH, and
we are TMH.
Hello and welcome to all our viewers tuned into live from here TMH with me, Deletna Dawalko. This is our daily English news. Today is the first day of our 3rd year anniversary weekend lineup, where we will have all of the events lined up for everybody that was out in the DC area protesting with us today. We appreciate you and we thank you for your continued support. Today also marks the 2nd day of mourning for victims of the continued aerial bombings that are taking place in the Tigray region. And for the past week, since the year has begun, there's been over 100 casualties and civilians that have been affected due to these aerial bombardments. And the 3rd day of mourning is tomorrow. This was declared by the Tigray Regional Council, while also passing a motion to declare the atrocities and the destructions that have been committed in the Tigray region as a genocide. As we move on to our headlines for today, the international aid community said it has been largely muzzled and impotent on the Tigrayan crisis, and at least 108 civilians have been in this year killed in airstrikes due to the aerial bombardments continued by the Abiy Ahmed government, according to the UN. Senior German officials says Ethiopian drone attacks harm prospects for the resolution of conflict. At least 108 civilians have been killed this month in a series of airstrikes in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, the United Nations said on Friday. The UN Human Rights Office urged the Ethiopian authorities to ensure the protection of civilians, saying disproportionate attacks hitting non-military targets could amount to war crimes. Let's take a listen.
We are alarmed by the multiple deeply disturbing reports we continue to receive of civilian casualties and destruction of civilian objects resulting from airstrikes in Ethiopia's Tigray region. At least 108 civilians have reportedly been killed and 75 others injured since the year began as a result of airstrikes allegedly carried out by the Ethiopian Air Force.
She detailed a series of airstrikes, including the attack that took place on the 7th of January in the Dedebit camp for the internally displaced persons, which left at least 56 people dead and 30 others wounded, of which 3 later died in the hospital. On Monday, 17 civilians were reportedly killed, as well as 21 others injured in an airstrike that hit a flour mill. On Tuesday, the state-owned Technical Vocational Education and Training Institute was also hit and reportedly killed 3 men, said Throssell. Numerous other airstrikes were reported last week as well. We call on the Ethiopian authorities and their allies to ensure the process and protection of civilians and civilian objects in line with their obligations and under international law. He also added that failure to respect the principle of the distinction and proportionality could amount to unimaginable war crimes. In related news, spokesperson for the UN Secretary General, Stéphane Dujarric, says depleted food, fuel, and cash in Tigray are crippling the humanitarian operations. The spokesperson depicted the grim picture in his interview with CNN on Tigray's humanitarian crisis. Let's watch.
Well, what we're seeing now in Tigray is one of the most constrained humanitarian crises in the world. We have over 5 million people, that's 5 million men, women, and children who are in dire need of humanitarian assistance, who need help to get food on the table, to drink, for life's basic necessities. And unfortunately, we're continuing to see fighting, which the Secretary General has called loud and clear in public comments, in private conversations, that we need to see an end to the fighting. As we speak, we're getting reports of fighting in Debele, which is a town, which is a critical town for us in terms of humanitarian access. We don't have the tools that we need to help those more than 5 million people currently. And that is a tragedy for the people of Tigray and for all the people of Ethiopia who need humanitarian assistance.
Dujarric emphasized that the extent of the catastrophe that's taking place in the Tigray region could be a lot worse than the UN initially emphasized and was able to assess at first.
There are very heavy discussions going on now in trying to help get better access and more predictable access. We haven't had humanitarian convoys going in the last 4 weeks. We haven't had fuel going in Tigray since basically the beginning of August. So we whatever fuel we can, we try to procure locally, but there isn't enough. And just so people understand, the fact that we don't have fuel, of course, means that we're limited in putting food on trucks to go out and distribute it. But it also means that there's a lot of areas that we haven't even been able to access and where we haven't been able to assess what the humanitarian situation in those areas. So there are a lot of unknown unknowns that we're not able to deal with at this time because of the fighting that's continuing.
Then that means the situation could actually end up being far worse than you and I could possibly even imagine. Stefan, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the program. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Suzanne. Thank you for talking about this.
Of course.
The total blockade that's been imposed on the Tigray region by the Ethiopian government has been inducing man-made famine in which millions and millions of people are at risk. Tigrayan diaspora in Italy yesterday demonstrated in front of the military armaments and training camp in company of Rome. Thomas Giovanni, one of the coordinators of the demonstration, told the TMH that Tigrayan diaspora in Italy urged the company, Leonardo SPA, to lift its hands off from directly or indirectly supporting the Ethiopian government's genocidal campaign on Tigray. Leonardo SPA, which is the past was also called and known as Fina Mechanica, is one of the major suppliers of the armaments, including drones, military software, through its auxiliary Miador to Middle Eastern countries such as Turkey as well as the UAE. The demonstrators also urged that the Italian government to regulate the merchandise of these weapons and the technologies by these companies to the Middle East countries that in turn sell them to third-party countries like Ethiopia. They argued irresponsible governments like Ethiopia's Abiy Ahmed's government are using these technologies, especially the drones, to massacre and kill civilians. The Italian company has a huge market in the Mediterranean, Horn of Africa, Red Sea, as well as the Gulf of countries, and provides training in the cybersecurity and the drone driving license. Thomas Giovanni said CEO of the company, Marco Minetti, was Italian's interior minister from 2006 and 2018. He is served by the grandfather, Second Lieutenant Tito Minetti, who was also during the Italian fascist campaign in Ethiopia, participated as a pilot. His plane was hit, forced to land on an enemy line during one of his escapades. Though he survived the downing of his aircraft, later he was captured and killed in a city and town of Dagahabur. Minetti's grandfather, Second Lieutenant was later awarded a Golden Medal for military honor as Italian Royal Air Force War Hero, and in a 1939 airport was also named after him in his native region of Calabria. Senior German official says Ethiopian drone attacks harm prospects for a resolution of a peaceful conflict resolution. Germany's federal government commissioner for human rights policy and humanitarian assistance, Louise Amsberg, made the remark in a statement on a recent drone attacks in Ethiopia's northern region. He said he is shocked by the reports of drone attacks on the refugee camps in Ethiopia last week, in which numerous civilians were killed. One of the drone attacks and strikes was on a camp for internally displaced persons, claiming the lives of 56 people. The commissioner was quoted stating, "These attacks not only caused terrible suffering, but also harm the prospects for a resolution of a peaceful conflict." He said all parties to the conflict must under all circumstances respect human rights, uphold applicable international law, in particular international humanitarian law, and avoid civilian casualties as well as displacement and forced migrations. The commissioner also added that the humanitarian organizations must have unhindered access to the people in need in the northern part of Ethiopia. The international aid community said to be largely muzzled and impotent on a time when humanitarian intervention is needed more than ever in the region of Tigray. Refugees International exposed the inaction of the international community, and including the UN and the large international NGOs, in an article titled, "Ethiopia has turned on itself. Now what? A changing battlefield, the same humanitarian landscape." This report was written by Refugees International. Since November 2020, the world was watched Ethiopia turn on itself, starving its own people and destroying its oneself one day at a time. The fighting goes on a recent airstrike on a camp for internally displaced people in Tigray, killing 59 people, injuring 30 others, some of whom were children, according to these aid workers. This comes days after 3 Eritrean refugees were also killed, 2 of whom were children in Mayani refugee camp. According to Refugees International, the international aid community, including the UN and other large international NGOs, despite diplomatic investments and highlighting dire humanitarian needs, have been largely muzzled, rendered largely impotent at a time when humanitarian intervention is needed more than ever. While many bear witness to the humanitarian crisis, they face threats, frozen bank accounts, losing access to areas where they could work if they happen to speak out on what's happening in their city. In spite of the fast dynamics of the war, the desperation for those inside of Tigray, parts of the Mahara and other regions has not changed, and Refugees International said that the starvation is a weapon of war, medicine is in short supply, and aid actors capable and ready to respond are forced to sit and watch the catastrophe unfold a little more with each passing every day. There are more than 2 million newly displaced people in Ethiopia on top of an already existing 1 million in the IDP population. Ethiopia also hosts more than 800,000 refugees, many of whom have found refuge in Ethiopia for years. Over the last year, more than 60,000 Ethiopians, mostly from Tigray, have fled into the neighboring country of Sudan, telling horror stories of human rights abuses, atrocities, sexual violence, and including massacres. Some are even drawing parallels to the Rwandan genocide and sounding alarm that Ethiopia is displacing a striking similarity. Likewise, vulnerable groups in Ethiopia, including long-standing refugee populations, such as Eritreans, are being killed, abused, and even kidnapped by Eritrea. Neither Ethiopia or the UN has been able to offer any adequate protection or assistance as the conflict rages on, and a few have managed to find safe passageway out of harm's way. Among most of the dire humanitarian issues, Ethiopia is on the verge of a famine that likes of which have not been seen since the Great Famine of the 1980s. According to USAID, some 900,000 in Tigray are experiencing famine, and the number is growing in other parts of Ethiopia as well. As of the 7th of January 2022, a mere 1,338 of the required 17,600 trucks needed to provide humanitarian supplies have been able to enter the Tigrayan region, which is only a mere 7.6% of the total trucks needed to help those in need. Ghent University reported in October of 2021 that somewhere between 425 and 1,201 people were dying from hunger on a daily basis in the Tigray region. And even if the conflict stopped today, the aid we're able to reach the hungry, food insecurity will plague this region for years to come. Indeed, fighting groups have not only stopped aid from reaching civilians, but also slaughtered cattle and blocked farmers from harvesting and planting crops for their next season. Refugees International urged the UN, the United States, and other states with influence, including Turkey, China, and the UAE, to work for peace in Ethiopia, ending the blockade and the complete aid access to those starving in Tigray for all of the regions in Ethiopia affected by this conflict, including the Amhara and the Afar regions, must be and needs to be top priority. Refugees International noted further diplomatic engagement is the step in the right direction, but as the crisis worsens by the day, the rest of the world must step up to end the conflict and famine avoiding the worst of what the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator, Maureen Griffiths, is called a stain on all of our consciousness. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you guys this weekend as we celebrate our 3rd-year anniversary. Goodbye.
I am TMH, and we
are
are
TMH.
What does Tigray Media House mean to you?
Tigray Media House is more than just an ordinary news outlet.
Tigray Media House is a platform that gives a voice to minority group.
A place where we get news about our people, by our people, in our own language.
But this platform is not exclusive to Tigray or Tigrayans.
They have worked with international media outlets such as CNN, BBC, the Associated Press, the Telegraph, and Sky News
to make sure all our stories are heard and the struggle of our people are being amplified across the entire world.
It has been successfully vital the last year as our people have suffered a genocide and telecommunications blackout that hindered journalists from being able to report the atrocities taking place in Tigray.
Tigray Media House has been a lifeline for us. It is one of the only news sources covering the genocide and war crimes being inflicted on Tigray and all across Ethiopia.
We will forever be grateful to them for being the voice of our people and giving hope to all of our families who have been silenced by this conflict.
And in honor of the 3rd-year anniversary since the launch of TMH,
we would like to invite you all to join us in Washington, D.C.
for a 3-day commemorative weekend starting January 14th through January 16th.
The event will include global protests,
panel discussions,
concert,
a dinner gala,
all in hopes of generating more awareness for the ongoing state-sponsored genocide.
Can't wait to see you all Dik a day.
I am TMH.
I am TMH, and
we are TMH.